The next level up in environment lighting is to use a high dynamic range image panorama, also known as image-based lighting. So we can apply an image to our background and environment. It does need to be a high dynamic range image to work well, meaning that the pixel values are based upon physical intensities. So if you just drop an ordinary image into the environment slot, you're not going to get good image-based lighting. It does need to be a special high dynamic range image. Let's add one. In the rendering menu, open up Environment. In the Environment tab, in the Common Parameters, we see Environment Map. Click the big button labeled None, and you get the Material Map Browser window. Navigate to Maps, OSL, which is Open Shading Language, Environment, and select HDRI Environment, which is a special map which has a lot of controls to color correct a high dynamic range environment. Select that and click OK. Then we get an open dialog. We need to browse for an image file. I'm taken to my 3ds Max installation directory. I've got an image in my current project. So I'll go to my desktop, in this case, to my exercise files folder, my current project. Inside there we have scene assets, and then images. Here's the file we want, which is quarry02 8k.hdr. Select that. That's an image from a website called HDRI Haven, which has free downloadable high dynamic range panoramas. With that file selected, click the Open button. That will take a moment to load in because it's a fairly heavy image file. Once it does, we can see in the perspective and physical camera views, we've got a viewport background. I can orbit around with Alt and middle mouse button in that perspective view and see that image from different points of view. We can see that we've got a sun and some clouds in the background. Now let's see what this looks like in a production rendering. I've set up the Active Shade renderer with Arnold to render the physical camera, so click Active Shade on the main toolbar. When that begins rendering, we can see that it really doesn't look that good. I expected it to be a bright sunny day, but it looks pretty dim. And this is just because of the default settings for the HDRI environment. We can fix those using a material editor. So I'll just push Active Shade off to the side for a moment and open up the material editor from the main toolbar. The Slate Material Editor opens, and in the center is the area for the graph, and that is called View 1. We want to drag our environment map over into View 1, so click and hold the mouse down on the environment map within the Environment and Effects dialog. Drag over to the View and Release. In the pop-up dialog, choose Instance so that any changes that you make within the Material Editor will actually be applied to the environment. So choose Instance and click OK. We can zoom in. Down here at the bottom of the Material Editor is a percentage field. That's a pull-down list. That's just the zoom factor. We can set that to 100%. Double-click on that node or map in order to load its parameters in the parameter editor. And while we're here, let's rename it up at the top. We'll call it ENV file. In the OSL map parameters here, we have a lot of controls. Scroll down a little bit. The one that's giving us trouble right now is this clamp feature. Clamp is setting a limit on the brightness of the high dynamic range image, and that's basically turning off the sun in this case. So let's disable clamp, and immediately we get the full range of brightnesses in our rendering. We can easily change the brightness by setting an exposure value over here. So let's set exposure down to, let's say, -2, and that means stopping down by 2 f-stops. If I gave it a value of +2, then I'm opening the iris by 2 f-stops. All right, I'll set that back to 0 where it was because that looked pretty good. So the overall exposure is all right, but the white balance or color balance looks a bit too warm. So I want to adjust that. We can do that directly within the HDRI environment map through this Tint color swatch. Click on Tint, and in the color selector, set the hue to blue and increase the saturation a bit. And when we do that, we start to see a color shift in our active shade rendering. So that's kind of the quick and dirty way to color correct, but it's really not the best way because we don't have a lot of control. So in the following movie, I'll show you how to white balance an image a bit more precisely using a black body node. Let's set the saturation back down to 0. And we've got white once again in our tint swatch. That's the basics of applying a high dynamic range environment. In the following movies, we'll look at color correcting the lighting as well as the background.